Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
What if much of what you learned in medical school was simply wrong or obsolete? That's the provocative premise behind our guest today, Dr. Robert Lufkin, where we talk about his new book, Lies I Taught in Medical School. Dr. Lufkin is a radiologist who had his own health wake-up call that made him critically reevaluate the conventional medical wisdom that he was taught. From outdated nutrition advice to the real root causes of chronic disease, Dr. Lufkin exposes how medical dogma often lags behind the latest science. In this eye-opening interview, he pulls back the curtain on topics like why calories from different macronutrients have vastly different impacts on insulin and growth pathways like mTor. He discusses why dietary fat has been wrongly demonized for decades while refined carbs and seed oils do the real metabolic damage. Dr. Lufkin also shares his personal journey of applying this new lens, using tools like continuous glucose monitoring and time-restricted eating to reclaim his own health. You'll learn practical strategies for reducing insulin resistance, taming inflammation, and preventing cellular aging. Whether you're a patient or a medical professional, get ready to challenge assumptions and embrace a more modern, evidence-based approach to well-being. Dr. Lufkin's Lies I Taught in Medical School just might set you free. Please enjoy this wonderful and empowering conversation that I have with Dr. Robert Lufkin. All right, Dr. Robert Lufkin, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time out of your busy schedule. And we're going to talk about probably a lot of cool stuff here. But before we get into your book, which is so aptly titled Lies I Taught in Medical School, which I think the title is really one of the best titles I've seen. So congratulations on the book. I know it's already a huge hit. But before we get into the book, tell us a little bit about where you are in medicine. I know that you're a radiologist, but tell the audience a little bit of your background, and then we'll jump into some other good questions.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Stephen, for having me on your program. I'm a fan, so it's a real honor to. I enjoy your podcast. It's an honor to be part of it here today. Thank you for inviting me. My background, as you said, I'm a physician. I was trained in radiology and medical imaging as my specialty, and I guess the point I want to make is that I represent mainstream medicine, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've spent my entire career, and I still am, as a professor at two large medical schools in Southern California, where I get to not only practice medicine, but I also teach residents and trainees. I learn from them. But also, I do research. I've written hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers. My lab has received millions of dollars in funding from drug companies and device makers and from the federal government. So the point is, I'm really representing mainstream medicine. So that's kind of where I came from. But I think I want to go on record. My book is critical of many things about mainstream medicine, but I have to say that I'm a believer in Western medicine and in mainstream medicine. I think the impact on our overall health and well-being in the 20th century is unequaled. Western medicine revolutionized with public health and infectious disease, made our lives, all of us, better all over the world. And even today, if I get hit by a bus outside,
right,
I want to have, I want to get my fracture set. I want to get a splenectomy, and I want to get that blood transfusion. So there's some things that Western medicine does better than any other approach in my mind. But what my book deals with, what we'll probably get into, is the idea in the 21st century, 80% of healthcare resources are spent on what are called chronic diseases. And these diseases, Western medicine has tried the same approaches that were so successful in these other things I mentioned, things like pills and surgery. And the problem is these chronic diseases, the pills and surgery can affect the symptoms, and they can even treat some of the symptoms, but they don't really address the underlying root cause. And that was an awakening for me. And I think a lot of people still aren't aware of it. Certainly many of my colleagues aren't at this point.
Right. Well, I think you've said a lot right there. And I would challenge you a little bit, because a lot of mainstream doesn't really want to look at cause. They want to look at symptoms, one disease, one drug, one orthopedic deformity, one or two surgical approaches, these types of things. So I think that in my opinion, what's happening is there's been kind of a hybridization of mainstream medicine, where some people like yourself that are very savvy and educated and look at some of these things that may not get looked at by more mainstream people. If they were looked at, they would help that much more, because it's amazing what happens when you make the patient better from a metabolic standpoint. All of a sudden, these symptoms that all of these other specialists are treating, they just kind of go away sometimes. And so, you see what I'm saying there, that in a perfect world, I think mainstream should dive into this stuff and say, man, how can we incorporate this more rather than less?
Yeah. It almost goes back to a very early philosophical debate about medicine that started with Louis Pasteur and germ theory in the 19th century, where the idea was that disease, it's what causes disease. And Dr. Pasteur believed that it was caused by a germ. And the model, of course, is anthrax or polio or, whatever. And you treat the germ and the disease goes away. And the competing theory, which eventually lost out in the argument, was sort of soil theory. In other words, it's not so much the germ or the seed, but it's the soil that allows the seed to grow or doesn't allow the seed to grow. And Western medicine has really swung far on the seed theory, and to my mind has ignored the soil theory, whereas both are really powerful concepts. And it's probably a combination of both of these, but I think, in my opinion, we're overlooking the soil too much and missing out on that. The obvious idea is COVID. You could say, well, COVID is caused by a virus. So, of course, it's seed theory. It's sine qua non. That's the demonstration of seed theory. It's caused by a virus. You either have the virus or you don't. Right? That's right. Forget the soil. Well, if you push back on that and you say, well, everybody gets COVID, but some people die suddenly of it, and other people, it's just like it's a headache and then it goes away. What determines that? Well, it's the soil. It's the environment, all the different things. So even COVID is an example of not just seed theory, but also soil theory. And for these chronic diseases, the point I make in the book, really, soil theory is what the approach we have to look at, things like lifestyle and all these other factors.
Well, I think that's a great point, because I recall reading something, I believe it was from the CDC, that said that they had no mortality in people that had a vitamin D level of greater than 64 nanograms per deciliter, which is kind of an interesting thing, because there's your soil right there. and then your seed is the virus. So that's a great point. Let me jump back to the impetus for you writing this book. Yeah, it came from your own health experience. Tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind sharing that, because I think that's a real important thing for people to understand, is that a lot of them think, well, physicians never get sick or they never have a disease.
Yeah. And what happened to me, I'd love to say I wrote the book just and my mind changed just because I wanted to make the world a better place and everything. But it was really, I was forced into learning these things out of self-interest when I came down with 4 of the chronic diseases that we discuss in the book and that are so prevalent in the 21st century, that are reaching epidemic proportions. Over half the population, well over half the population has at least one of these, and many people have multiple ones. So when I got these 4 chronic diseases, I went to my doctors and they prescribed prescription medicines for me. And they, I asked about lifestyle, and they said, well, it doesn't really work. You need to resign yourself. You're going to be on these prescriptions for the rest of your life. Get used to it. And at that point, I knew how it was going to play out, given those diseases. If I didn't do anything, it wasn't going to end well. And they told me that no, these pills would not only take care of the symptoms, but they would, basically address the underlying disease. They would take care of it, so to speak. And at that point, I began to question their recommendations, and I went back to the literature and began reading, and I realized there was a huge volume of really breakthrough scientific evidence in the last decade or so about our understanding of these diseases. And I now believe that the pills that I was given, although they treated the symptoms, and this is true across the board for these chronic diseases, although they treat the symptoms and may even save my life from dying of an acute event with these diseases, for the most part, they don't affect the underlying course of the disease. In other words, the disease continues on. So for my personal journey, I began looking at what would affect the underlying root cause of these diseases, and I realized it was the same lifestyle suggestions that were good for obesity and diabetes and mental illness and cancer and Alzheimer's and hypertension. Almost all these diseases responded to the same lifestyle changes. And I began implementing those in my life, and eventually was able to reverse these diseases to the point where I didn't need the prescription medicines anymore. And the idea of the book is to talk about my journey and also explain how these things work, and hopefully get the word out so that other people can benefit from it, and they don't go down the path that I went down without being able to reverse them.
Well, you make a great illustration of that in your book when you talk about how hypertension is traditionally treated now. Okay, you get your annual physical, and unfortunately your blood pressure's a little bit high. They write you a prescription for an antihypertensive, and off you go. They don't talk about anything about what exercise can do, all of these different things. But so the poor patient's taking this pill, and now his blood pressure's down in the range, but he hasn't changed the lifestyle. And so it's kind of like masking that symptom. And like you say, it may prevent an acute event, but what's the sequela down the line if you don't talk to that patient, take that extra few minutes to say, well, we got a problem. We're going to bring your blood pressure down with this medication, but we'd like to get you so that you could get off of that medication with all of the things that you talk about and recommend in the book.
Yeah, and the classic example of that is a heart attack. The statistically, you, me, and most of our audience will likely die of heart attack as the number one cause of death.
Right.
And today, if someone gets a heart attack, the life-saving procedure that will be done will be to a heart attack is due to narrowing of blood flow of the blood vessels to the heart. And what is done acutely today is the placement of a stent, which opens up those blood vessels, and it widens the blood vessels so the blood flow resumes to the heart. And many people, when they get the stents, they have a misunderstanding of what's going on. In other words, a friend of mine said, wow, I just had a heart attack. Ooh, they saved my life. I got a stent. Wow, I dodged that bullet. I'm good now. And what they don't realize is, just like the pills for the hypertension or just like these chronic disease things, the stents will treat the acute symptoms, but they don't really actually have any effect on long-term survival.
Right.
And the reason is that the stents don't affect the underlying heart disease, the atherosclerosis, the narrowing of the blood vessels, which continues in all the other arteries of the body, and even in the stents themselves will eventually clot off again. So if the patient thinks they're cured by the stent, it's a false sense of wellness, and they haven't really done anything to address the underlying cause. Well, the problem is there aren't really any pills that will address heart disease. Statins, we talk a lot about statins in the book and the limitations of those. So there really isn't a pill. But like all these things in the book, lifestyle can truly slow down and in many cases even reverse these chronic diseases. And it's the lifestyle that modern medicine is overlooking in many, many cases.
Well, before you were diagnosed, or when you were diagnosed, you made a decision that, okay, I have to change my lifestyle. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a big change for people. And humans like to continue down the path that they've been comfortable in for a long period of time. And then you get this kind of a wake-up call, for lack of a better way to say it. How did you do it? Did you do when I started biohacking, I looked at 4 essential things. I looked at nutrition first, exercise, sleep, and spirituality. And I figured if I could work on those 4, I might have a better chance. But I couldn't do them all at once. So how did you go about it?
Yeah, those are great points, Stephen. And my approach was very similar. But before I say that, let me just say one thing about lifestyle. I think it's not just a fault of modern medicine of not utilizing lifestyle more in the treatment of these things. I think part of us, the patient in me and most people would rather have a quick fix. In other words, if I go into my doctor's office, I want a pill or I want surgery. A pill requires no commitment on myself other than once a day or a couple times a day I take it. Surgery, I may have to take time off from work, but then I go back to my life. I don't have to change who I am.
Right.
And that's much easier to just get a pill than actually change my lifestyle and examine those 4 areas that you mentioned, because it forces me to change my behavior, which is much, much deeper. So I think all of those things are important. For me, I started off with my nutrition, started off first there, and then my spirituality or stress or mindset. I believe they're all related to similar things, and of course I would include exercise as well in there, both physical exercise and mental exercise as being key. And then finally, even if you fix all of those things, if you don't address any one of them, then the last one is even sleep. Any one of these things can knock your metabolism off. So even sleep, it was a matter of looking at, am I getting not only enough sleep, but am I getting quality sleep as well?
Do you monitor your sleep with anything like the Oura Ring or anything like that?
I'm probably the only biohacker space that doesn't have an Oura Ring, and it's everyone else. They're ubiquitous, but and no shade to Oura. I think it's a great company, no judgment. I just haven't gotten around to getting one. I mean, I use other things to monitor my sleep. I can look at blood oxygen. There's some at-home monitors you can get from Amazon over the counter that will tell you your blood oxygenation and monitor it over the night. And then there are many apps you can use on your smartphone, your Apple, your Android phone that you can download that are very effective. And then for me, it was a real wake-up call, because as a physician, as you know, in healthcare practitioners, being on call for many of us it's a ritual. It's part of what we do. I used to be on call 24 hours a day. I would carry a beeper proudly, on my hip, a pager as they're called. And people would just call me at any time, and I would, have to do procedures and stuff. And I felt it made me stronger. I was, I was tough. I felt I was doing good for my patients, when actually I was potentially harming my patients, and I was putting my own health at risk by not getting enough sleep. And they're surprised. One thing, writing the book, I realized that there's a lot of variability in sleep patterns. You have some, Elon Musk saying, I only need 4 hours, blah, 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 all this. And the actual evidence is, like so many things, it's actually a much narrower window. Most people need around eight hours of sleep a night. Much less than that, or even much more than that, can be harmful, even tied to cardiovascular risk and things like that. So I began, making sure I got enough sleep, changing call schedule so it was allowed me to get enough sleep. And now I'm at the point where I even stop using an alarm clock to wake up, and I know I'm getting enough sleep when I wake up. And if I need an alarm clock, at least for me, that's a sign I'm probably not getting enough sleep, or the quality may be out of whack too.
Right. Well, one thing I found in my practice is that when we can give patients metrics, they tend to stick with the program a little bit better. They're more emotionally and philosophically driven to kind of channel that. I think continuous glucose monitoring was one of the things that really was very beneficial for me, as well as some of our patients, that because it gives them that feedback. So, but to circle back, so was nutrition one of the first? You said nutrition was one of the first things that you attacked for your own personal health. What about what type of diet did you just get rid of the carbs?
Yeah, well, nutrition has always been central to my life. Actually, when growing up, my mom was a dietitian, so I was seeped in nutritional wisdom based on sort of common knowledge, the food pyramid and all, which sadly I believe is actually unhealthy advice. As the book talks about. But so I was tuned into nutrition, but I was just eating the wrong kind of nutrition, which, in my opinion, was unhealthy. So the first thing I did was I didn't change anything I ate. So this is an easy thing somebody can do, and that was I just changed when I ate, because my mom had told me, everyone had told me, eat many small meals throughout the day, snack, So the first thing I did was cut out between meal snacks, cut out after dinner eating. And then I immediately began to feel better, and then I actually went further and cut out breakfast. So and then most days I even cut out lunch too. So I just have one meal a day when my kids come home, and for me, that's a good plan, because I feel energized. I don't get brain fog, and as you know, food itself, any type of food, regardless of the ingredients, just taking food into our system triggers inflammation, and inflammation is, along with insulin resistance, is one of the big drivers of all the chronic diseases and aging itself. So just by giving my body a rest for, 12 hours or 15 hours a day from constantly jamming food down my throat, allowed the inflammation to turn down a little bit, and I believe has beneficial effects just in that, even without changing anything that I ate. So that was the first thing I did.
Well, I think there's some science that backs that up, because I recall a rat study where they took two groups of rats. The control group could just eat any time that they wanted. The experimental group was time restricted, but they both took in the same amount of calories per day. And the rats that were in the control group got fat and lazy and arthritic and all of the things associated with it. And this other group of rats that ate the same amount of calories, but just time restricted it, they didn't get that, which is pretty powerful. I know rats aren't humans. Some are. Some humans are rats, but, you see what I'm saying, right? That, that's a pretty easy thing to do if you're committed. It's like, okay, I'm going to clean up some of the crap, not going to open up the Doritos bag, and I'll just go from noon to 6 o'clock. That's my eating window or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden,
and I think that study has been reproduced in some form in humans, at least in a limited way, where isocaloric substitution is such a powerful thing. You eat the same number of calories every day, but instead of eating them throughout the day, eat them once or in 3 meals or 2 meals, however you do, and that will have beneficial effects on metabolism. I think were the endpoint markers for the human study. But yeah, that's such a great point.
So you're talking about calories. I thought one of the brilliant things was the way that you explained what a calorie really is. And, you have the folks, I forget how the nomenclature you gave it, but it was like the energy guys. It's this many calories, regardless of the type, whether it's protein, fat, or carb, energy consumed versus energy expended, and that's it. You just exercise more, cut your calories down. Talk a little bit about that, because I think you make a really important point in there. You have a graph that shows the difference in reaction from an insulin standpoint between the macros. Tell the folks about that, because that's really good, and that'll give them a lot of motivation right there.
Yeah, that was a huge wake-up call for me in the understanding of calories and weight loss, because today in America, along with these chronic diseases, obesity, most adults are overweight or obese, and this is a driver for metabolic disease for all the chronic diseases. So it's fundamental to our health, but I think there are still misconceptions or lies being taught about obesity, and the one that you reference is a great one. It's the advice that we're all given even today from leading medical schools and experts, that if you want to lose weight, just exercise more and eat less. And this, in the face of it, we all know is a fallacy, because exercising works up an appetite. So it's very hard. Exercise has many, many health benefits. Unfortunately, weight loss is not one of them. If you look at a 500-calorie muffin, the amount of exercise you'd have to do to burn those 500 calories is quite a lot, and it doesn't really pencil out. The other sort of lie that is promulgated by the healthcare system is that a calorie is just a calorie. Right. A calorie is a measure of heat and energy consumption of our body, and the idea that all calories are equal, I think, is a lie. There are 3 macronutrient food groups I'm sure your audience is aware of. There are 2 that are essential for our lives: fat and protein. If we don't eat those, we will die. And when we eat them, we get full and we're satisfied. The 3rd macronutrient group is called carbohydrates. It includes starches and sugars and some types of fiber, which don't really provide much caloric intake. But on the caloric side, the starches and sugars are not necessary for life. In other words, there are human societies that exist without significant carbohydrate intake. The other thing about carbohydrates that differentiates them from fats and proteins is that the main hormone in our body that produces obesity is something called insulin, and it's an important hormone in diabetics, but it also tells the cells to store fat. So when insulin is turned on high, our bodies store fat. And the interesting thing is, of the 3 macronutrients, only carbohydrates stimulate insulin to any significant degree. So if you want to gain weight, you eat carbohydrates. your body will stimulate insulin, you'll store fat, and then you'll continue to be hungry because you didn't get the energy that you thought you were getting because it got stored as fat.
Right.
And this is really key in I think in obesity control, and that is that if you want to lose weight, a calorie is not a calorie. So 150 calories of hard-boiled eggs, which contain largely fat and protein, is not equal to 150 calories of potato chips, which is maybe 6 potato chips or so.
Right.
And that's the reason, this is all the reason why most people can eat 1 hard-boiled egg or 2 hard-boiled eggs, and they don't eat the whole dozen after that. But very few people, myself included, can eat just 1 potato chip.
That's right.
or anything else of a high carbohydrate, because carbohydrates not only stimulate insulin and tell our bodies to store fat, they also tell us to eat more because they make us hungry.
Right.
So it's sort of a vicious circle there.
Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor. I'm constantly exploring new avenues to enhance well-being and address any health concerns. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to an exciting supplement called Stem Regen, which I take daily and genuinely believe could revolutionize your health journey as well. Stem Regen stands out as a game changer in the realm of wellness. Crafted from 5 potent plant extracts, it boasts a remarkable ability to stimulate the release of your body's own stem cells from your red bone marrow. Why is this significant? Well, stem cells are the superheroes of our body's natural repair system. They possess the extraordinary capacity to morph into various cell types, aiding in tissue regeneration and repair. As we age, the quantity of circulating stem cells in our system reduces significantly, impairing our body's ability to heal and rejuvenate itself effectively. Stem Regen steps in to counter this decline by kickstarting the release of stem cells into circulation, thereby bolstering your body's innate repair mechanisms. Once released into your bloodstream, these mobilized stem cells actively seek out areas of damage or injury, initiating the healing process. By incorporating Stem Regen into your daily routine, you're essentially empowering your body to tap into its own regenerative prowess more efficiently. I firmly believe that Stem Regen could be a valuable addition to your wellness regimen, especially if you're seeking to fortify overall health and vitality, accelerate tissue repair, or expedite recovery from injury or illness. This first-of-its-kind stem cell mobilizer is changing the game in regenerative medicine. Don't wait to unleash your body's innate healing capabilities. Visit stemregen.co and use the code SBPOD to get a 15% discount off your first order of Stem Regen. Yeah, you hit a lot on that. There's a lot of people that believe that you have to have a certain amount of grams of carbohydrates to survive in a day, and you point out that that's really not true.
Yeah, there are, a friend of mine on Twitter and podcasts. I've talked about him before. He lives in Alaska. He's a native Inuit, and his grandmother lived in an igloo, and he has pictures of her where they would live in an ice house for months of the year, and they would eat nothing but whale blubber and seal and stuff like that. But the point is, there were no carbohydrates really in any significant amount. And there are several human societies that live without carbs at all. And there's a dietary group, the carnivore dieters eat just meat, which has essentially very little carbohydrate in it. You can't do it. You can't do the opposite side. In other words, you can't eat an only carbohydrate diet. You'll die because you're missing the essential macronutrients, which are proteins and fats. So it's interesting that carbohydrate is non-essential. And it's also, in my opinion, the most harmful one as far as driving inflammation, insulin resistance, and the chronic diseases. And it's the one macronutrient we really don't need.
Oh, yeah. So, almost every patient that we have with peripheral neuropathy, one of the things that we're really looking at is, first thing I tell them is sugar is a neurotoxin. Doesn't matter what type of sugar it is, you get enough of it, it's gonna kill your nerves, and it'll be a painful process in that. there's been this demonization of fat for basically since Ansel Keys back in the 50s and so right now there, at least in my experience, when I talk to people, they like, oh, I don't want to eat fat because that's going to make me fat. And it's the exact opposite of that. And it's like, but it's kind of like this whole population has been indoctrinated so long and lied to that that's a big deal. You go to the grocery store, you can't find any like high fat yogurt. That's what I would like. Give me some saturated fats and a lot less of the, all the other stuff that they have to put in to make it taste good because there's no fats anymore. But touch on that a little bit because we're dealing with 5-6 decades of misinformation.
Yeah. The whole thing, fat has been demonized. You're right, since Ansel Keys, decades ago.
Right.
And we were taught that largely as a driver of heart disease that, cholesterol, that's why we didn't eat eggs, right? Eggs were bad for you. And today it's recognized that eggs are your dietary cholesterol doesn't significantly affect your blood cholesterol. So you can eat as many eggs as you want. And I believe that eggs are one of the healthiest things you can eat, actually. It's sort of nature's Ozempic, if you will.
Right.
Because it's just fat and protein and very little carbs. But we're also told not to eat saturated fats on animal products and all. I remember growing up, my mom used to cut the fat off of meat that we were eating, and we'd ask for lean portions of meat or, like you say, low fat yogurt. But today, and I now believe that saturated fat is actually healthy and it's important that we eat. But I don't believe all fats are healthy. I think there are unhealthy fats, and these are what are called industrial oils. They were created. This is a great backstory. The original one was made at the turn of the 20th century by German scientists trying to make a lubricant for submarines, and they developed it. They called it Crisco, and they said, well, let's feed it to people too. And they sold it to Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble bought it, and then they donated, at the time, the equivalent of millions of dollars to a struggling heart association, which was the American Heart Association, which today still recommends on their website eating these industrial oils as a heart healthy alternative to saturated fat. And as we talk about in the book, I believe these industrial seed oils, canola oil, vegetable oil, soybean oil, all are unhealthy in that they drive inflammation, and we should minimize them in our diet. We need some in our diet, but problem is the junk foods that are so ubiquitous that make up most of the, quote, food in our stores are full of these junk seed oils, salad dressings, practically any junk food has them in it as well. So they're very, very hard to avoid in our diet, but we substitute healthy, avocado oil, olive oil, coconut oil. There are healthy substitutes for oils that I believe we can successfully use in our lifestyle plans.
Well, I'll give you an example of that. When you go into the grocery store and you start reading the labels, first of all, I have to take my surgical loupes so that I can read some of because it's so tiny, right? And invariably, you think, wow, this is great. It's a balsamic vinaigrette. And you look at it and it's filled with all kinds of different seed oils. And it's like, oh, this is like drinking kerosene or something, and it's awful. But the topper just happened to me about a month ago. Went to Costco, and I'm always looking for the healthiest options I can. And I found this garlic dip that had like 1 gram of carbs. And I thought, this is pretty good. So I get it home, and I made the mistake. I didn't take the time to really read it. Probably couldn't have read it anyhow without the loupes because it was such a tiny font. Anyhow, it has this, I think it was the third ingredient, which that's a bad sign. When the bad thing is like in the 1, 2, or 3 position, that's not where you want to be with this. and it said non-compressed jet expressed canola oil. And I'm thinking, what the hell is that? I mean, is that the submarine lubricant that's been squirted out under high pressure? I mean, and it's like, and it was astounding. It's like, why would they put that? Because
I mean, I had the same awakening. I mean, I go to Trader Joe's and I want to buy hummus because hummus is pretty healthy, and I look and it's full of canola oil because canola oil is an inexpensive inexpensive food product you could put in there. Now, not to throw shade at Trader Joe's, they do have some hummus that does not have canola oil on it. But to your point, read the labels. I mean, I went to I was eating out with my family the other day, and I'm trying to be healthy. And I said, okay, can I get mayonnaise with that? And they said, sure, of course. I go, but is it real mayonnaise? And they go, oh yeah, of course it is real mayonnaise, like wanting to be healthy, because real mayonnaise is healthy. It has eggs and different things. Right. So I said, can you just show me the container that it comes in? And then sure enough, he brings it out and it says real mayonnaise across the front. And it's the name of a product. It's called real mayonnaise. And I turn it around in the ingredients, and sure enough, soybean oil, which is one of those pro-inflammatory seed oils, and canola oil were the two main ingredients there, which, are less expensive than the ingredients it takes to make real mayonnaise. But they're, it's a problem. The same thing happens with avocado oil at restaurants. Right. Is it avocado oil? Bring it out. And they bring it out and it says real avocado oil. And then the first ingredient is canola oil because, Yeah. So read the labels.
I mean, we're swimming around in all of this poison, and a lot of times we can't even recognize that we're swimming in it because we think it's a good clean pool, but it's contaminated with these things. And your point about hummus, I gave up on hummus for the very reason is I couldn't find one without some seed oil or canola oil. It's like, well, you think you're eating healthy and you're trying to do it, but then all of a sudden you read this stuff and it's like, that's not so healthy. But I wanted to jump to one other thing. You talked about continuous glucose monitoring in the book, and I found that as a very strong patient metric. I found it really strong for myself. I wore a CGM for about 6 months. I was absolutely shocked at what you would perceive as a good food and then see what your insulin would spike. And it was... You talk about a feedback. I mean, once you see that and the alarms going off, it's like, wait, I just had a little bit of popcorn, or I had a handful of raisins, or some crazy thing that you think is not such a big deal, but then you see what your body does in reaction to that. That's a great motivator to say, hey, I maybe not want to eat that anymore.
Yeah, having that personal touch is really game-changing. And then also our bodies, respond differently to foods, although they follow general principles that we talk about. But, I had a friend who said, hey, I eat oatmeal every morning. It's the healthiest thing. He put on his glucose monitor for the first time, and he saw what oatmeal did to his blood sugar. Right. Now he doesn't eat oatmeal anymore. And the great thing about glucose monitors in the United States, at least, you can get them in Britain without a prescription, but in the U.S. you need a doctor's prescription to get one, which is really criminal. I think it's unnecessary, and thankfully that's going to change this summer when there's going to be a consumer version available that you can just buy at your CVS or Walgreens or something without the necessity of a doctor's order. So hopefully that will revolutionize access, certainly for people who want to understand their body and how their body responds to nutritional factors.
Well, the other thing the CGM can do that a lot of people don't really think about, it's almost like a stress meter itself, because I'll give you an example. And I know in your book, you talked about your mother's Alzheimer's late in life. And I had the same scenario. My mother died with Alzheimer's, and it was very stressful for me to go see her and visit her. And I remember one time, this was in the 6 months or so that I was wearing the CGM, I was doing a 24-hour fast and drove up to see her. And I hadn't eaten anything in 12 hours, 14 hours or whatever. And as soon as I walked into the memory care facility, the monitor starts beeping. I'm saying, wait, I didn't need anything. But that was all of the stress, the cortisol that's like,
wow.
And so, I've had other patients tell me that they've had the same experience, but it's kind of a cool little nuance with CGM.
Yeah. In the book, I have I don't know if I identify it as myself, but it was me. It was basically, I was taking I was wearing glucose monitor, and it happened, I've been fasting all night, since dinner the night before. And it was like mid-morning, 10 o'clock or so. So my glucose is flat along there. And it just so happened I developed a kidney stone, which, renal colic is one of the most painful things that people describe. And I'll tell you, it was very painful. But the interesting thing on my glucose monitor, even though I'd eaten nothing in, 18 hours or 15 hours, my glucose just shot through the roof. It went off the scale, and it was due to, like you say, the stress and literally the pain. And the glucose didn't come down until, a couple hours later. I got IV morphine in the emergency room, and
brought it down.
The pain went away and the glucose came down. So to your point, there are many factors like stress and other things that can drive glucose. And we even talk in the book about obesogens. In other words, it's great to get your diet under control, that your diet drives obesity, of course, but then we talk about other things, chemical and environmental things that actually can make you fat, or stress can make you fat, or other things that are obesogenic without, the obvious things of things we put in our mouth.
Right. Well, I think that, the CGM is a good thing for people who are pretty motivated, that want to do things. And then to get the average patient that comes in and says, I just want the pill, I don't really want to do the work or anything like that, the CGM's not going to really probably do too much for them. But I think it's really interesting when you look at, let's say, we'll go, I'm going to jump a little bit, it's a little bit tangential, but when you correct nutrition, you also help the other things so much that you wouldn't think are nutritionally related. Let's talk about sleep. One example is if you stop eating at least 3 hours before bed, you usually sleep better. And you can see that in your metrics, and it's very clear. A lot of people don't know that. But if you tell them, hey, this is an additional benefit that you'll get, and then just chart out what really spikes that glucose and what doesn't, all of a sudden, 30 days, 60 days down, they come back and they say, this pain is gone that I had, or all of these other things that you aren't even treating, it's just these other symptom complexes from everything.
Yeah, it's fascinating how doing a lifestyle intervention, let's say with diet or with other factors, and improving, generally the term is metabolic health, we talk about in the book, that can be addressed with any of these lifestyle things. But then the people will say, wow, my migraine headaches went away, or my irritable bowel syndrome went away, or my joint pain stopped coming in, or my brain fog. I certainly noticed the brain fog going away immediately once I changed to this metabolic thing. I have more energy during the day and all sorts of things. So it's dramatic how far-reaching these things are. Even things with mental health, people know they have less depression, and Chris Palmer has shown that this type of metabolic diet and lifestyle can actually reverse psychiatric diseases that he's done in his hospitalized patients in Boston. For some, not all of them, but for some of them, the results are totally mind-blowing, where they literally go home and back to their families and their jobs just by a lifestyle intervention, which is really amazing.
Hey, before we wrap up, you made a great illustration on how the macros, fats and proteins, don't spike the insulin. Insulin is not a good thing in excess. And you talk about TOR. You want to tell the audience what TOR is and maybe what mTor is, because they're going to get confused, because when they read things, they'll see TOR and then they'll see mTor with a little m.
Yeah, TOR and mTOR are really the same thing. It's one of my favorite molecules in biology, and I will argue it's one of the most important signaling molecules in all of biology, but it wasn't even discovered till almost the beginning of the 21st century. It's a molecule, to give you an idea of how important it is. it's conserved evolutionarily over billions of years. What does that mean? It's present in yeast all the way to human beings. It has an essential survival function. It senses whether nutrients are present, typically glucose and insulin, and other things like oxygen. And when nutrients are present, it tells the cell to grow. And when nutrients are not present, it tells the cell not to grow. In order to survive, you don't want to grow. And it does things like repair. So it turns inflammation way down, it repairs, turns on things like are called autophagy. And in a normal human, in a normal yeast, mTOR is beneficial both being turned on and being turned off and switching back and forth. But in humans, there's a very powerful theory of these chronic diseases and longevity itself that mTOR is being turned on too much into this growth mode, and this for a number of environmental factors. And then when this happens, it drives these chronic diseases and ultimately shortens our lifespan as well.
So TOR stands for a target of rapamycin?
Right. And rapamycin is another magical drug that was discovered. It wasn't invented. It occurs in nature, but it was discovered in the 1960s. And it's a beautiful story on Radiolab. You can listen to sometime, but it's basically Rapa Nui or Easter Island. The soil was harvested there, and bacteria were found there, which produce this amazing compound called rapamycin. And then fast forward 40 years, rapamycin has all these magical effects on aging, and every one of the chronic diseases I mentioned, rapamycin has beneficial effects. And people want to know, well, how does rapamycin work? What does it do? And then they did the research, and they figured out there was this one protein, one master switch in the body, which was previously unknown. And they discovered it, and they named it TOR, target of rapamycin. And that's how TOR got discovered, and mTOR, but it was through rapamycin that it was found.
So rapamycin's discovered in the 60s, and TOR isn't until the early 2000s.
That's right. That's
pretty incredible.
Well, actually, late 1990s when TOR was characterized and named. But today, rapamycin is a FDA-approved drug. It was originally going to be for athlete's foot, for fungus control, because it stops fungus, but it now is expanded to renal cell transplants. It's FDA indications for cancer as adjunctive therapy. The stents in atherosclerosis are coated with rapamycin, and they don't clot off. There's strong evidence that rapamycin is beneficial in Alzheimer's disease, to the point that there are now multi-million-dollar studies using humans and rapamycin with that. So it's a fascinating compound, and it points towards mTOR and just how much we still have to learn about our basic metabolic mechanisms. mTOR is great. We talk a lot about it in the book, but mTOR is just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface.
But I think one of the things the audience needs to understand is that after you are about, 25, 26 years of age, you don't need this TOR constantly in the hyper growth mode. You need it to, like you say, fluctuate, shift it on, shift it off, that type of a thing. But you point out very eloquently that one of the things that activates TOR to go into the hyper, let's call it, for lack of a better way, the disease-causing mode in later life, is high carbs, bad diet, aside from the other environmental stressors as well. But that's an important thing. So for the patient out there that wants to be more motivated, they need to think about two things. One, calories. Well, actually, maybe three things. One, calorie is not a calorie. This carb is going to upregulate insulin, which is a very bad actor for many reasons, and it's also going to affect this TOR.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating that, as powerful as rapamycin is turning TOR down to this healthy autophagy state, turning down inflammation. The other thing that does it is the same lifestyle tools that we talk about in the book, the nutritional things, the sleep, the stress, the exercise, all those things help turn mTor into this favorable metabolic position. And, some people take mTor, some people take rapamycin for longevity or for, for chronic disease and health. And you might say, well, that's just another pill. So isn't there indeed a pill that will now do this? And I take rapamycin, but I would never take rapamycin, nor I would recommend it to anyone unless they're doing the lifestyle things as well, because there's so many things we don't understand about rapamycin, how it works with, AMP kinase or sirtuins or other metabolic pathways that there are probably benefits of lifestyle that surpass the benefits of rapamycin. And there are probably synergistic benefits that maybe with rapamycin and lifestyle that are better than either one individually. But I definitely, as much of a fan of him as rapamycin, I would not do it without doing the lifestyle things as well. Otherwise, You're missing a huge benefit. You owe it to yourself and your family.
No, I totally agree. Well, I've just got to compliment you on your book. It's not only is it a great book, but I think more importantly, it's a really important book, and people could radically change their lives just by reading this book. And so I have to congratulate you on that. And there wasn't a topic in the book that I had not had previous exposure to, but what the book did is it put it together for me to be able to synthesize this a little bit more. I knew the stuff about TOR, but I missed the connection between, the carbohydrates and the poor lifestyle and activation of TOR. And so what the book is filled with that. So anybody listening, I highly recommend this book. It's so informational, and it's truly a life-changing book. And I want to congratulate you on that. You can go to tell the folks how they can get a free chapter of the book.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Stephen, for the feedback. You're very kind. If you want to check out the book, you go to my website and you can download a free chapter, see if you like the writing style or see if it resonates with you. My website is robertlufkinmd.com. And I'm active on social media, and my social media links are there as well.
I'll put all of that. I'll put all of that on the show notes. So anybody that has any interest, and you have a lot of resources on your website as well.
Great. Well, yeah, and absolutely. Yeah. Please follow me on social media, reach out. We have a newsletter. We have a podcast also that hopefully Stephen's going to be on before too much longer. And it comes out every week. It's a video podcast.
Cool.
So check that out too if you're interested.
Dr. Lufkin, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much, Stephen, for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thanks also for all the great work you're doing.
Appreciate it.
Having neuropathy pain? Get relief at U.S. neuropathy centers. If you're suffering from neuropathy symptoms like numbness, tingling, or burning pain in your feet, you're not alone. Over 20 million Americans are impacted by this condition. At U.S. neuropathy centers, we specialize in using cutting-edge, non-surgical and surgical treatments to reduce neuropathy pain and restore nerve function. Our protocols combine metabolic support, neurovascular therapy, and regenerative medicine, an approach that gets results many times when others fail. Don't let neuropathy keep you from living your best life. Take the first step and call U.S. neuropathy centers today. 404-228-9892 or visit our website at nervetx.com.
I hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If you think you might have tickled just a few neurons inside that cerebral cortex, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues and tell them that they need to get spelunking. Also, if you can take a minute to leave a review on your podcast provider of choice, and especially Apple Podcasts, that would greatly help the show and be so appreciated, provided it's positive. And if not, then just keep your pie hole shut and stay down in that cave. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.